Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us at EPA's second Environmental Science Seminar Series event, Green Chemistry, The Missing Elements, with special guest speaker Professor John Warner. Today's event was brought to you in collaboration with Monash University, and we're very grateful to Monash for allowing us to have John speak in this particular series. Our event today is being held on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners. I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and the elders of other communities who may be here today. I'd clearly like to welcome our guest speaker, Professor John Warner, President and Chief Technology Officer of Warner Babcock Institute. Our special guests, Mr. David Pullen from EPA's Science, Engineering and Health Committee, and also Leonie Walsh, who's here from that committee as well, Dr. Mihaela Ivan, who's Acting Deputy Chief Health Officer, DHHS, Professor Bart Follink, Head of School of Chemistry, Monash University, and my other colleagues from Monash University, Ian James and Tony Patty, who made all this possible, welcome as well. I'd also like to welcome everyone who's live streaming this event in Victoria. We actually have people from far-flung places, as well as about 100 people live streaming at the moment. So hello everyone out there. So just a few housekeeping notes before we start. Please put your phones on silent for the duration of the event. And if the emergency tones go off, please follow the instructions of on-site staff, and it's fairly clear where the exits are. So what we're here to talk about today is green chemistry. And for some students, they might think of green slime because they did that at school. And then for those of us who are interested in the role of chemistry in products and wastes and all the rest of it, we talk about sustainable development and stewardship of our life cycle of products. It's an area of chemistry and chemical engineering focused on the design of products and processes that minimise the use and generation of hazardous substances. Green chemistry is behind many of the world's innovations in terms of some of our pharmaceuticals, household products, etc. Examples include the use of chicken feathers in the manufacture of chips, engineered enzymes to create pharmaceutical products, biodegradable plastics and bio-based paints. It's an emerging field, but a really important one. And one of the reasons it's really important to us at EPA is we tend to deal with the legacy of chemical contamination of the environment, much of which is created by some of the products that are in common use today. And every year we actually import 200 industrial chemicals. Many of them are hazardous. Of the new industrial chemicals classified as hazardous to human health, about 30% are used in personal care products or cosmetics. And even those, many of these chemicals have made our lives easier because they've improved consistency of products, shelf life, they've reduced flammability. There's not enough being recycled back into products or raw materials, and some of those fantastic chemicals are now causing us some legacy issues that we now need to deal with. It's also worth noting that we're producing about 12.7 million tonnes of waste generated by Victorians in 15-16, of which 33% was sent to landfill. This is clearly something that's not desirable. We know about the issues of landfills. We know in Victoria at the moment about the issues with recyclables being stockpiled and the associated issues. So we really need to respond to these challenges, and we need to respond to it as an EPA from the potential impacts on the environment at the end of the process. But boy, we need to get at the beginning of the processes so that we produce materials and products that are not going to have those impacts on the environment, or that if we are going to produce them, we can actually manage them and recycle them and reuse them again. So we need to change the way we approach the development and application of new chemicals and the way that we design and market products. And this is where green chemistry comes in. We also need a new generation of workers who research and develop these products for the future so that we remove these impacts from waste. And it's something that we really need to pay attention to now, because the information about the generation of waste products, and it's almost like just a straight line up. We're not actually seeing a decline in our wastes, and particularly in the environment. So through the excellent work of our academic institutions, such as Monash University, we're developing a new generation of researchers seeking to use green chemistry to eliminate the generation of waste at the outset by making chemical reactions more efficient. Our guest speaker today, Professor John Warner, is one of the founders of Green Chemistry, co-authorising the defining text Green Chemistry, Theory and Practice. So for the students out there, clearly he's a great speaker. On behalf of the EPA and Monash University, it's my great pleasure to welcome Professor John Warner today. He's President and Chief Technology Officer of Warner Babcock Institute. He is the recipient of the 2014 Perkin Medal. He's widely acknowledged as the highest honour in American industrial chemistry, and he also received the 2004 Presidential Award for Excellence in Science, Mentoring, and as well as the Council of Science Society President's 2008 Leadership Award. He's recently been named one of the 25 visionaries changing the world. Professor Warner is one of the founders of the field of green chemistry, as I've said, and has published nearly 300 patents, papers and books. You don't look old enough. So it's my great pleasure, and please join with me in welcoming Professor Warner today. Thanks, John.
I feel old enough. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here today with the EPA from Victoria and my friends at Monash University. To come here, I don't feel I'm introducing this concept of green chemistry. It's something that is well established here in Victoria and at Monash, and there's so many things that have happened over the years here, and having been here for the last couple of days and speaking to the students and to the faculty at Monash and some of the people from local industry, the opportunities and the things that are just now beginning to happen as well are pretty exciting. And so it's an honor and a privilege to actually be here and be part of all this happening. I do want to give a shout out. I teach a class back in the United States, and at exactly this moment in time, normally on Wednesday evenings in Boston, I would be teaching this class, so my students are joining in. So hi, everyone. I will, but I'm happy to be here, and I do want to provide some kind of a background on green chemistry. So, I feel a lot of people have heard of it and have their own perceptions of what it may or may not be, and so I'd just like to give that background as we go through this. But before it's important to me that I always begin my presentations with a disclaimer saying that I don't claim some gifted insight. If I come off sounding pompous and presumptuous like I have all the answers, I don't. I have lived my life just like everyone else has had their lives, and I've come to look at the world in the way that works for me. I spent the first 10 years of my professional life as an industrial chemist working at the Polaroid Corporation doing chemistry. I spent the next 10 years of my professional life as a professor in the UMass system in plastics engineering and chemistry, thinking about teaching chemistry. And then I spent the last 10 years of my professional life in a small entrepreneur company focusing on inventions and patenting. And throughout the last 30 years, I've interacted with many different regulatory agencies and government agencies from the perspective working with the state of California during the Schwarzenegger administration and the federal government, the EPA in the United States during their TSCA reauthorization and what was going on there, state of Massachusetts and the European Union REACH legislation. So as a practicing chemist, I've kind of dabbled in a little bit all of the different aspects of the chemical enterprises, which causes me to look at things from my unique perspective. So as I say things and things sound, really good and you agree with them, well, that's really cool. If I say something that sounds absurd, I apologize ahead of time, but it worked for me. We are living in a very polarized world. You turn on the radio, you open up a newspaper, you look on the internet, and you hear about this bad thing that's happening, this toxic thing that's happening, this dangerous thing that is happening, and over and over and over, we're inundated with all this bad news. You almost wonder who in their right mind in 2018 would want to be a chemist. Look at all the problems that happen. It's almost like the game Whack-A-Mole. You know, a game where the little guy comes up and you hit it with a hammer and another little guy comes up. Well, in the United States, the American Chemical Society, what is its mascot? And so we hear about brominated flame retardants, whack. You know, we hear about bisphenol A, whack. We hear about phthalates, whack. We hear about nanoparticles, whack. We hear about ocean plastics, whack. And it's like we're exhausted. This issue comes up. We think about it, and then before we really get to the conclusion of it, another issue comes up, and we're over there, and over there, and we kind of, part of us is terrified. Oh, this is scary. Part of us is saying, is this just a bunch of noise? Is this real? Should I care? And we practicing chemists who understand molecular structure are not quite sure. And if we who understand molecular structure are not quite sure, how is the general public supposed to respond to all this information? And so vendors and consumer companies are doing us no favor, with chemical-free products. Think about that a minute. You can buy a tube of some magical material. I said material, although that's an inappropriate word because it's chemical-free. It's not even a material. It's an idea, okay? So you can get this container of idea that somehow magically stops you from being exposed to the sun. My goodness. And so this does not help us to actually say to society that it's about chemicals and that we need a chemical-free, okay, water is a chemical, air is a chemical. We're in serious trouble if we had a chemical-free environment, okay? And so let's just hope that never happens, all right? Maybe in the deepest of space, somewhere halfway between Jupiter and Saturn, but even there's enough stuff that you can't even call that chemical-free, all right? And so this isn't the answer. But what it does is it creates this panic, this sense of despair, like, oh my goodness, what are we gonna do? And this is what we've got to avoid. What I have found in my history is that people who are philanthropic, that want to write checks to support issues, they kind of like despair. So people will write checks to support despair, but no one gets up out of their seat and does something in response to despair. And so if we're really going to address these issues, what we can't do is go down the spiral of, oh my God, this is terrible, everything is horrible, everything is bad. It is not. We have a wonderful society, we have a wonderful world that is accomplishing many amazing things. We're curing people of diseases, we're feeding people who are hungry. There's so many things that the chemical enterprises are doing that we should be super proud of. This idea that it's all going, amiss, it's not quite really accurate. But it's still, we have a responsibility to be focusing on this and making sure we're addressing these very important issues. But maybe we're not asking the right questions. Maybe instead of saying, oh, gee, is this toxic, is this dangerous, is this bad, I would argue that there is a much more fundamental question we should be asking. And that is, why would a chemist make a hazardous material in the first place? Let's assume that nobody wants to do that, okay? Let's assume that there are red dyes in commerce that cause cancer. Let's assume that there are plasticizers in plastic that cause birth defects. Let's assume there are monomers that are endocrine disruptors. Well, no one would want to just do that, right? They would rather avoid it. I have never in my life, seen this mythical epic battle of good and evil, industry trying to sell us toxic things because it's so profitable, and we, the environmental activists, as Luke Skywalker, trying to protect the world from Darth Vader. I don't see that world. I'm sure it does exist at some level, but really what the problem is that why are we making these materials? Maybe what we should be doing is, instead of asking ourselves how we make molecules, should ask, how do we make chemists? Because really that's the people that are making the molecules. Now, I'm not a historian, I'm not a sociologist, I can't quote the history of chemistry. Ironically, I'm a chemist. So maybe looking at how I became a chemist might have some instruction here. Okay, so I'm not a typical chemist that in the second grade had a chemistry set that I had fascination and dreamed of being a chemist. Had no interest in chemistry. I'm from, if you can tell my accent is from Boston. And I'm from a city south of Boston, Quincy, Massachusetts, where two presidents of the United States were from. And in my opinion, the greatest chemist who ever lived, R.B. Woodward, is from the city of Quincy. He would have gotten 3 Nobel Prizes in chemistry had he lived long enough. But I never heard of this guy, okay? I grew up, and I have a huge Sicilian German family. I had 42 first cousins growing up within a 1-mile radius, okay? We're carpenters, plumbers, electricians. We didn't really understand this concept of college, okay? When I had a class in high school in English on the second floor, I thought that was higher ed. I didn't know. But all my friends were going to college, and so one day, I decided, okay, maybe I'll go to college. I came home. My mother cried. My father was mad. But I agreed to work full-time in the construction industry, 40 hours a week, paid my own tuition, and went to the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Okay, but what horrified my family worse than the fact that I went to college is what I went to college for. You see, I was a music major, okay? But I played in a band called, wait for it, The Elements. All right? This had nothing to do with carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, okay? There's a Rubik's Cube, there's a glass ball, okay? It's the late 70s. These were our elements. All right? And things were going pretty good. We were playing quite often, 3 nights a week at the Best Worst Dives in Boston. We had an agent. We had a recording contract, so we were actually recording in a studio, and things just felt to be going pretty well. When disaster hit, and the drummer of the band, my close friend, ends up being diagnosed with leukemia, and over the course of 6 months, he passed away. All of a sudden, my life is kind of turned upside down. Here I am a musician, but what's going on here? So at University of Massachusetts, like many universities, even a music major has to take other classes. They have to take a foreign language, they have to take a math class. I had to take a science class. Oh my God, I had to take a science class. Huh? All right, well, I like biology, mitosis, meiosis, genetics. That seemed pretty cool. I like physics, astronomy, subatomic particles. That seemed pretty cool. So, biology, physics. And so in a moment of indecision, I added it up, divided it by 2, said, I'll take chemistry. Not because I had any interest in chemistry, but I couldn't pick between biology and physics. All right? And so I'm taking chemistry in this class, and I'm taking the lab for the class, and this professor, Jean-Pierre Anselme, comes walking in one day. Looks at me, music major, walks by, and he looks to the student next to me. He goes, would you like to do research? This was going on in my life. I said, can I come look? And I followed him into the research lab. And everything changed. All my life, because I was marginally good at music, I was an artist. And the world had 2 types of people, artists and scientists. Never the twain shall meet. But when I realized, and I got into the lab and realized chemists did more than PV equals nRT, I said, ooh, they make things, they design things, they create things. I imagined ramming my brain full of electrodes and composing a piece of music on a keyboard or designing a molecule. And I bet you the same neurological activity happens. That the word art and the word science have nothing to do with creativity. That bringing something into the world is a uniquely human thing. And we completely confuse people by these words. And once I realized that creativity and chemistry are one and the same, I fell in love with it. Next thing you know, I'm publishing 5 papers as a teenager in peer-reviewed journals. I spoke at the National Academy of Sciences in Washington. In fact, I made the cover of Celebrity Magazine with Boy George. Now, if that's not a claim to fame, okay. One day the phone rings at my home, and this guy goes, John Warner, we consider you Boston's best and brightest college graduate. We want to do a story on you. And I go, no. And I hang up the phone. And he calls back a couple minutes later. No, really, we want to do a story. I go, no. And I hang up the phone. Well, the next day I go to school, okay, because I'm still working construction. So back then I wasn't as snappy dressed as I am now. And so I'm working in my lab, and the chancellor of the university bangs on the door and says, "You will go get your picture taken." So they grab me, kicking and screaming, and here I am surrounded by all these happy people, all right? And they do this story about this kid who's assembled over 100 molecules that never existed in the world before, putting atoms in unique geometry that God never intended. And I'm looking at this thing and go, I'm a chemist? How did that happen? Well, through flotsam and jetsam, next thing you know, I find myself at Princeton University working on cancer chemotherapy. I had a great group of people that I was working with, a lot of people, but I was lucky enough to work with this amazing professor, E.C. Taylor, and we designed a solid tumor anti-cancer drug that's now on the market by the Eli Lilly company. I played a teeny role in this thing, but we had about 16, 20 publications on different ways of synthesizing it and looking at the enzymology of it all. And so just to show you the weird relationship between science and society, I lost my mom to cancer back in the early 20s. She was receiving a version of the drug that we had designed 15 years earlier as a graduate student. So strange way that society has a way of chemistry becoming very important. Princeton has now a 7-story chemistry building built entirely on the proceeds of this one pharmaceutical drug. So Princeton's very happy with that. So things are going, I never told my father that I was a graduate student. He would have killed me. I told him I was an apprentice, so that was okay. He came to my commencement. So when I graduated, that's my lab, all the messy stuff and everything going on in there. And he's kind of looking at a telephone. It's a different version than that. But one day I'm in my research lab at Princeton, and the telephone rings. And it's a senior corporate officer from the Polaroid Corporation, the instant photography company. And he's kind of weirding me out. He goes, "Oh, John, I've been following your career. I remember when you were at Celebrity Magazine. I remember you at the National Academy of Sciences. I'm thinking he's a stalker." I go, "Oh." He goes, "Let's have lunch." So I told 6 people where I'd meet him and when I'd be back. And I go and I have lunch. And at lunch, he offers me the job to head exploratory research at Polaroid. I said, "Dude, I'm 24 years old. I'm a medicinal chemist. I already had academic appointments to be a professor of medicinal chemistry." He told me how much he was going to pay me. I said, "When do I start?" And next thing you know, I'm working for Polaroid, coolest place to be for an organic chemist in the United States. Edwin Land, the founder of Polaroid, is one of the most famous U.S. inventors. He got the Perkin Medal in 1974, which I thought was so impressive, till they gave it to me. Then how good can it be? But I had a real good time. I got tons of patents on different things: holography, medical diagnostics, film coatings, all different things, and just had a really good time. But what would a medicinal chemist do to a place like Polaroid? Well, it's interesting because I was very introspective and thought about the chemical enterprises, and I said, over the last 200 years or so, we've done amazing things in chemistry, right? We really do some pretty cool things. Like I said at the beginning, the pharmaceuticals, the agricultural agents, the textiles, the electronics. But when you look at how we manufacture things, everything is at high temperature, high pressure, harsh reagents, right? And so I said, why is that? And I said, in nature, everything happens at ambient temperature. Everything happens under room temperature, room pressure, using mostly water as a solvent. And what I realized is it had to do with how molecules interact with each other. Not the molecular structure of the molecule intrinsically, but how the non-covalent forces interact. Now, I would love to give you a lecture on non-covalent derivatization. If you want not 1, not 2, but 3 cures for insomnia, just have me talk about this thing. The license plate of my car is NCD, so I really get into this, okay? And one of the inventions that we worked on, we started the Polaroid in the photographic industry started calling Warner complexes, okay, of all things. And it was a way of controlling the dissolution rate of small organic molecules in an aqueous film structure. All right, and so in the United States, if you have an invention that's going into manufacturing, you need EPA approval from the federal government. And so back then it was called low volume exemption, pre-manufacturing notification. This is like 1989, 1990. Okay, electronics didn't exist the way they do now. It was a big box of files that we put and we mailed to Washington, D.C., and we waited, and we waited, and we waited. And ultimately, the EPA rejected the application. Nothing to do with toxicity, nothing to do with environmental impact. It was just, they never heard of non-covalent derivatization. They said, what is this stuff? Small particles? Are you crazy? Molecular complexes? Are you high? They had no idea what I was talking about. So Polaroid stuck me on an airplane and sent me to Washington, D.C. Probably the first or second time in my life I've been on an airplane. I'm holding a briefcase of overhead transparencies, and I'm going to go meet the EPA and talk about this thing. So I meet the branch chief of the Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics, this guy named Polonastis. Wait a minute. Remember the kid that I followed into the research lab when I was a music major? It was him. I've known him since I was 11 years old. In fact, we went to UMass together. At the time, I was playing in a jazz band with his older brother, and there's his older brother with the sax. There's me on the keyboard, my older brother. This guy here that's playing guitar, if you've ever been to Las Vegas, the big billboards in Las Vegas, Legends of Rock, the dude who plays Rod Stewart is him. Has nothing to do with this talk, just thought it'd be cool. All right, so anyways, I called attention to Paul and said, well, wait a minute. Polaroid has been manufacturing these things, all these solvents, all these energies, all these reagents, all this nasty. And here we have now this aqueous, non-toxic, environmentally benign way of doing things. Shouldn't you be celebrating this? Shouldn't you be psyched that this is so much better? But yes, it's different. Isn't anything better for human health and the environment going to be, by definition, different? And if the EPA says, we're going to make it difficult for you to do different, isn't that orthogonal to even your mission? Shouldn't we promote things that are good? So hold that thought. At exactly that moment in time, while I'm doing this, thinking about this from a productivity, a pragmatic industrial chemist, getting things to market and understanding and navigating regulations and things like that, and approaching it from that perspective, my personal story takes yet another horrible turn. Things are going really well at me for Polaroid. It looks like I'm going to be promoted to a very wonderful position when disaster hits. My 2-year-old son, John, dies of a birth defect. My son John was born with a disease called biliary atresia, where his liver was completely detached from his intestines. He can't metabolize water-insoluble nutrients. So he was given emergency surgery at birth, and by 2 years old, we lost him. The night of his funeral, I'm lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, asking myself, wonder if something I touched caused my son's birth defect. Wonder if, heaven forbid, I got an award for something that ended up causing my son's disease and ultimate death. You know, here I am, a very successful chemist. You know, I'm kind of familiar with books like Our Stolen Future that talk about the impacts of molecules on the environment and things like that. But I'm thinking, I get my head big as anything. I'm so cool, I'm so awesome, I'm so wonderful. I've got all these awards, I've got all these patents, I've got all these things. I'm just so awesome. I've synthesized all these molecules, probably the most prolific synthetic organic chemist my age in industry. And I realized, an idea what made a molecule toxic. How could I be so successful and have no idea what molecular structure has to do with toxicity? It wasn't that I didn't know the answer to the question, had I touched or done something that caused my son. It was the fact that I had absolutely no frame of reference to ask the question. How is it possible? You know, I start looking, and there's tons of literature. The field of toxicology, the field of environmental health sciences is constantly coming up with all these information about higher incidence of certain types of tumors in professional chemists, elevated breast cancer mortality among professional chemists. Now I'm looking, there's report after report. How is it that 4 years of undergraduate, 4 years of graduate school, never had a conversation, never had a discussion, never had a seminar, never had a class, never had anything at the intellectual level of what it means to be a chemist on how do you look at molecular structure and assess impacts on human health and the environment. I felt there was something missing. There was a missing element in my career. All right? And so I looked, and every year in the United States, just in the United States, we graduate 15,000 undergraduates in chemistry every year. We graduate 3,000 master's degrees, 3,000 doctoral degrees. In 2004, we started graduating more women than men as chemists. What could be more important to the field of chemistry than an understanding of reproductive hazards, of an understanding of mechanistic toxicology, of all these things, and yet not one university requires a chemist to show any proficiency on how to assess molecular structure and toxicity, environmental impact. Why do we have red dyes that cause cancer? Why do we have plasticides that cause birth defects? Why do we have monomers that are endocrine? Do you think the fact that chemists have absolutely no training in what makes molecules do those things might have a little bit to do with it? Now, one could despair and say, oh my God, this is terrible. Or you could say, wait a minute. Therefore, there is a path forward that we can perhaps start addressing these kinds of issues. All right? And so what Paul and I realized is that we needed a science, not a policy, not a philosophy, but a science to essentially have journals and textbooks and classes and conferences and workshops. That's the way science works. A group of people do something, they talk about it, another group does something, and they build upon it. If we're really going to start doing this, we needed to create a thing that people could focus on. And so that was the birth of green chemistry. So Paul and I, 20 years ago, this book came out. And actually, we started writing it longer before that. But this is the 20th anniversary of the book. And I like to say, had I thought anyone was ever going to read this book, we would have written a better book. But this book, you open it up and you're waiting for something earth-shaking. You're waiting for something brilliant. You turn the page, yep, that makes sense, yep, that makes sense, yeah. Gee whiz, a chemist should probably understand what makes a molecule toxic before they make it. Yeah, that makes sense. And it's just common sense, and anyone could have done it. So it's just strange that we wrote it at the right time in the right place and made this observation that there was this missing element in the field of chemistry. And I guess I'm shocked that over the last several years, it's been translated, I think, into over 15 different languages. I've been to over 50 countries. I feel like Forrest Gump, the guy Forrest Gump. I'm going around and I'm meeting politicians and presidents and ministers and princes and this guy, and that was kind of cool actually. But in this thing that anyone could have done. All right, and so, but what I'm most proud of with this is what I call the 12 principles of green chemistry. And so the point here is, they're on their way. I think they might be late, but I have a 5-year-old daughter that's traveling with me. And if you happen to see her after this talk out in the hall, you'll find that she speaks perfect English. She will have a beautiful conversation with you. She'll talk and she can talk your ear off. You talk back to her and she'll talk back to you. And it's just like most 5-year-olds. She's very precocious that way. In a couple of years, she'll learn to read and write more. And then someday she's going to sit in a class and she's going to learn about nouns and verbs. Now, ironically, she's already using nouns, verbs, prepositions, and adjectives. Why bother have a class when she's already using it? Well, I would argue, for better or for worse, she's mimicking what she heard her parents say. She's mimicking what the environment has told her, and so she's not really owning her English language. She's just getting by. But when she has that class, when she learns about sentence structure, when she learns about the parts of speech, she transcends all that, and it becomes more with willful intent. She constructs her thoughts, not only in how she communicates to other people, but how she actually thinks herself. I would argue we chemists, since the beginning of time, have done green chemistry. We wake up in the morning saying, I prefer not to die today. All right, the really insightful companies have realized that if you kill your customers, that's bad for sales. And so people know to not make toxic materials. But I would argue we do it like a 5-year-old speaking English. We don't really have the sentence structure and the rules. We're just getting by trying to wing it. And so the 12 principles of green chemistry is that part of body of knowledge within this massive, beautiful, wonderful field we call chemistry that focuses on anticipation of the impacts on human health and the environment before you make the thing, not years later or, heaven forbid, a decade later when it's in commerce or accumulating in some landfill somewhere. Okay, and so that's the point of it. And so to me, green chemistry is the act of removing hazard from society. So yes, there is an environmental component to it, but that's not enough. If it's not successful in the market, then it's just a whimsical idea on a bookshelf. And so it has to have superior performance. It has to, for a host of reasons, have superior cost. We can't have this be some elitist thing that only the expensive products are safe. And so for something to truly be green chemistry, it has to have superior performance, superior cost, and succeed on the market for those attributes alone. And then, oh, by the way, here's the sustainability, the green chemistry component of it. And so when we have regulations, which are important, until we invent alternatives, we are passionately dependent on regulations. But anytime we have a regulation that's forcing society to use a technology that doesn't really work or is too expensive, that in and of itself is not sustainable. And so if the chemist and the chemical engineer has the skill set to go back in the lab and invent something that has superior performance and cost, everything is a lot easier. Doesn't solve all the problems, but everybody's job gets just a little bit easier. And so that's the point of this. And so what I did is I ended up, realizing that this isn't a pushback in the market for green. We have a perception that green means it doesn't really work and it's too expensive. And so when someone comes to me and says, John, we have to go beyond green chemistry, we have to worry about performance and cost, I giggle they didn't read the book, because that's the whole point. All right. And so to me, what I realize is that the biggest barrier to the adoption of green chemistry technology is its invention. All right. And so do we have a workforce capable of doing this? So at this point in time, it was about 1996, 1997, I quit Polaroid and I went to the University of Massachusetts, chemistry, plastics engineering, biochemistry, and we started a PhD program in green chemistry. Everything that's in a normal chemistry program, but added a semester class in mechanistic toxicology, added a semester class in environmental mechanisms, added a semester class in law and policy. Over the next 11 years, over 120 students passed through this program at different levels. Average time it took one of these students to get a job in industry, 2 days. The longest any student was on the market looking for a job was about a week because she turned down the first several job offers. I've been out of academia for over a decade. I still get phone calls from companies. John, you got anybody coming out of the program? Because they're world-class inventors that can compete with any chemist that's working at a bench inventing stuff, but they actually have a clue about toxicity and environmental impacts. And that's a differentiation because that's one of the single biggest impediments to success in the commercial marketplace is understanding that landscape. So the way I look at it, you see, is all the products and processes that we have available to us today, the ceiling tiles, the carpeting, the electronics, I would argue that maybe 10% are truly benign. 90% of them have something wrong, big or small, somewhere in between, but we have a lot of work to do in improving over 90% of the things out there. Now, if you do this thing called an alternatives assessment, and you look at something existing in the market somewhere in the supply chain that's going to improve things, you'll be successful maybe 25% of the time. But today in 2018, I would argue over 65% haven't been invented yet. It's not like people are hoarding these technologies for some profit reason. They literally don't exist. So you can look at this in despair, or you could say, what better time in human history to be in the business of the chemical enterprises? That all the fascinating things that we've had to do since the beginning of what we call chemistry, and the inventions and the technologies and the intellectual challenges that we've just now become that much more relevant to the future of humanity and society. Why is it that every 12-year-old kid, 11-year-old kid who's thinking about growing up, saving the world, whatever that means to them, is becoming a chemist on the top of the list? Who's going to invent the future, if not them? So what are we doing wrong in chemistry that all we are is usually represented as the problem? When in fact, while I admit there are issues in our history that we have caused on many of these problems, we're also the only path to a sustainable future. Okay, and we need to realize that. So how does green chemistry fit into that big picture of sustainability? Well, the way I look at it is sustainability is this huge, huge, undefinable thing. To me, my personal thing with all the words in sustainability, sustainable chemistry, clean tech, all these nebulous words, people go, gee, what does that really mean? And people go, well, I think it means this. And there's not a lot of good definitions around, except when it comes to green chemistry. There's actually a book, there's a definition, there are 12 principles, and so green chemistry actually has a fairly precise definition to it. And how it fits is in sustainability. You could talk about sustainable economics, agriculture, education, business, chemistry, all kinds of anything in human endeavor we can look at through the lens of sustainability. Sustainable chemistry is the part that works with the molecules and the materials. But even that's pretty big, right? Chemicals policy can be sustainable chemistry. Remediation is sustainable chemistry. Exposure controls. Green chemistry, I see the subset, water purification, alternative energy, other things. So green chemistry to me is agnostic of the application. It is the building blocks. So a solar energy device is a sustainable technology. But if it's using toxic materials that in 20 years are going to go into a landfill and everyone's going to be pretty sad, it's still not green chemistry. So the ends don't justify the means. Green chemistry, we still got work to do. That doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to make the solar panels and do the best that we can. It's going to take time to invent these things, but green chemistry is that little piece that is agnostic to the actual application and just looks at the building blocks before, during, and after use. So it looks at the solvents, the catalysts, the feedstocks, the toxicity, the persistence, the energy. Well, there's 12 principles of green chemistry, so I'd say there's 12 ways of breaking it down, but that's the point. It's no bigger and no littler than that. It's just that little part that has to do with the invention of technologies and tapping into the vast knowledge of toxicology and environmental health sciences to be on day one of an R&D project, to be part of the design criteria by willful intent. All right, and so where do products come from? When we look at product, we take a molecule and we turn it into materials. We call that basic research. We turn materials into components. We call that applied research. When we turn components into devices, we call that development. When we do a lot of it, we call it manufacturing. All right? Well, if you're in this business, what do you worry about? You worry about performance. You worry about cost. Hey, there's no difference. My definition of green chemistry and what we've been doing in the chemical enterprise it's kind of the same thing. It's just when we put environment in the middle of all this, we start asking ourselves, where are those molecules coming from? At the end of a product's life, where is that molecule going? And as we manufacture it, sell it, and use it, who is the only person who can do serious mitigation of the impacts on human health and the environment? The inventor. And if the inventor doesn't have the knowledge to anticipate those impacts on human health and the environment, then all we can do is worry about the landfills someday in the future. So it's not the birth of ethics, okay? When I was a musician, I had the clairvoyance to ask a chemistry professor, I said, is chemistry dangerous? If I become a chemist, will I expose myself or my future family to risks? Think about the clairvoyance. And you know what his answer was? His answer was, if you're asking yourself that question, you should probably get another major. Okay. And I never asked my question for a very long time. All right, and so, but it's not that the guy's a bad guy or anything. It's that chemistry has to be dangerous. It's just what it means to be a chemist. But no problem, we're going to wear gloves to protect our skin. We're going to wear masks to protect our lungs. We'll wear goggles to protect our eyes. We'll put filters and smokestacks to protect the air, the land, and the sea. We got it covered. So that first slide with all those headlines, if you ask people the day before, hey, geez, this is kind of nasty stuff, are we okay? They go, yeah, we're fine. We got all this mitigation going on. What could happen? Stuff happens. All right, and so the way green chemistry, obviously we are standing on the shoulders of Herculean giants that have designed ways to mitigate risk via exposure control. Whether it's personal protection, whether it's, filters and encapsulants, and we depend on those people and will for the foreseeable future. Everyone in this room, while they're alive, this is the way we're going to have to continue to do it. But if green chemistry is a revolution, it's saying, but wait a minute. If we also use the tools of chemistry to focus on the intrinsic hazard, not to its exclusion. We're always going to need exposure control. But everything a chemist can do to reduce the intrinsic hazard makes the job of exposure that much easier. And so that's the point. And this is a whimsical dream. I don't believe this is going to take over a century to do. The chemical enterprise is 3 centuries old. We can't snap our fingers and tomorrow everything be green. This is going to require the innovation and creativity of thousands and thousands of chemists over the next several decades. But the point is to dream about a day where we don't have to have exposure control because it's intrinsically safe in the first place. All right? So industry immediately got this. So when the book came out in 1998, by 2001, most multinational companies had internal green chemistry programs. They get it. Okay, if you got a nasty, if you got a safe, the costs associated with storing, transporting, treating, disposing, the regulatory cost, the liability, work health and safety, corporate reputation, community relations, who in their right mind wouldn't rather mitigate all those costs by having something that is cheaper? Because it's already intrinsically safe. So from a fiscal responsibility perspective, it just makes sense. All right? So what I did in the United States, I tallied all the environmental regulations imposed by the U.S. federal government. Went back to Abraham Lincoln's time, back in the 1870s. Not a whole heck of a lot happened until 1962, when Rachel Carson published Silent Spring, the birth of the modern environmental movement, the year I was born, and all of a sudden things change. Now, I'm just a simple chemist. I'm not a mathematician or a statistician. If I look at this long enough, I start to detect a trend. All right? That each of these pieces, these acronyms, a piece of the federal legislation saying if you're using this, that, or the other thing, you got to make sure it's not getting into the land, the air, and the sea. And this, from an industrial perspective, is all cost. If you want to do business and you got to deal with this, take out your wallet and what is it going to cost for the filters and the gloves and the lawyers and all the different things you got to do, because all environmental regulations are about added cost. Okay, think about it. And a few years ago, DuPont's R&D budget was $1 billion a year. That year, their environmental compliance budget was $1 billion a year. Most big companies, their environmental compliance budget is the same as their R&D budget. They spend the same amount of money inventing their future as they make sure they're compliant with these technologies. So the CEO says, from now on, I want all my scientists to only invent non-toxic, environmentally benign, non-regulated things, because otherwise it just makes so much more money. Great. Not one of those chemists have had a class in toxicology. Not one of those chemists have had a class in environmental mechanisms. You can want to do something really bad, but if you don't have the skill set to do it, what do you do? So there's a mistake to believe that this is an awareness issue. It's an ability issue. And that's why what's so cool about being here in Victoria is that you've got the pieces in place already from Monash and from the people around here that have that competitive advantage, that have this thing going on. Pike Research, one of these analysis, claimed that green chemistry technologies will be a $100 billion industry by 2020. It already is. Okay, so this is already outdated. All right, and so I look at the world through the lens of toolbox. The chemical enterprises has a toolbox. We have drawers for different chemical transformations, carbon bond forming reactions, oxidations, reductions, you name it, we can do it. If you can design a molecule and it doesn't violate some fundamental law, we can probably make it. But if you imagine a green chemistry toolbox of those transformations that are environmentally benign, non-toxic, and non-regulated, like I said, that's 90% empty. I believe an individual, a company, a developing country will open that green chemistry toolbox first. It just makes sense. But odds are the draw's going to be empty. What do? You can't say, stop everything, let's invent a new technology. You know, I joke all the time, a lot of bureaucrats think that an invention fits on a Gantt chart. You know, so 2:30 on Tuesday we'll invent this. You know, that's just not the way inventions happen, right? You can try for a very long time and come up empty. So what does the company do? They close the green chemistry toolbox, open the traditional, say what are they going to cost for the gloves, for the masks, for the lawyers, for all this stuff, put business and add that to the cost and go forward because they got quarterly demands. They got to be done. They don't have the luxury to just stop and try to invent something. So the opportunity here from a moral and ethical perspective, the opportunity here from a financial perspective, is to own technologies in the green draw. Because people want them if they're available, if they work better than the alternatives, and if they cost better than the alternatives, they will succeed in the marketplace. So I've spent 10 years at UMass, and I did pretty well. I was called the country's #1 science professor. I got an award from the president. I spent a half an hour in the Oval Office. I don't know which one of us looks more frightened in that picture. And what did I do after this? I quit. I quit academia. Why? Well, around that time, there was this big furor about bisphenol A in plastic bottles. I don't know if you remember that the first country to address this was Canada. Canada banned BPA in Nalgene plastic bottles. And because I'm an amusing speaker, any science writer that's becoming sad with the story they're writing, they call me up and ask for a quote. John, say something so we stop crying. And so I'm driving in my car, my cell phone rings, and pull over to the side of the road, dutiful driver, and I'm in a parking lot of a grocery store. And while I'm talking, a pregnant woman comes out, and she's fumbling with her bags and her keys, and she takes her cash register sheet, and a neuron just exploded in my head. You know, I'm going, you know what drives me crazy? Drives me crazy is that you got femtogram quantities of exposure of BPA from plastic bottles. Yes, it's a serious problem, but it's tiny. When you think of thermal cash register receipts, if you hold on to a thermal cash register receipt for 30 seconds, you will get more transdermal exposure in that 30 seconds than a lifetime out of drinking out of plastic bottles because you've got free BPA in thermal cash registers. You go, calm down, John, calm down. We're doing a story on plastics. But they mentioned in the article, oh, by the way, John Wanna says cash register receipts. Oh, my goodness. Next thing you know, thousands of websites. John Wanna reveals thermal cash register receipts have bisphenol A in them. One of the biggest talk shows on National Public Radio in the United States, Tom Ashbrook on Point. I'm on that talking about John Wanna reveal. Like, I didn't reveal it. It was already there. And even this world-class journal, on the same page as a cat pushing a shopping carriage, John Wanna reveals this. I'm looking at that and I said, it's time for a change. All right. All my life I'd spent inventing technologies that improve the sustainability of the toxicity, but no one ever cared. The one time by accident I'd identify a problem, I get more recognition from identifying the problem than solving the problem. And I know that's not what I want to do. That's not what we need people to do. We need people to focus on not the headlines, but the actual solutions. And so, had the luckiest thing, I met Jim Babcock. Jim Babcock is the former chairman of Babcock and Brown Investments. People may know him here. He bought into my vision, enabled us to create an R&D firm that I pinch myself every day. It is a 42,000 square foot chemistry laboratory with the most brilliant 30 people that I could find, and every piece of equipment to synthesize small molecules, to synthesize polymers, to coat things, to fabricate things, to evaluate things. And all we do is call ourselves an invention factory. We invent stuff. We don't publish papers in journals. We don't speak at technical conferences. We focus on the pragmatic getting things to market. Our average cycle time from an idea in our heads to the commercialization is usually 12 to 14 months. Okay, which is pretty nice cycle time. So the Wanna Babcock Institute does a lot of contract invention. 80% of our business is with other companies. Now, when people come and put logos of companies they're working with and say, look at me, I just think that's not cool. And so I'll never talk about the companies that I'm working with. About 150 patents over the last 10 years, they are assigned to the company. So if someone wants to go through and find my patents and see who they're assigned to, you can figure it out. But I'm not going to talk about that because that's not cool. We've got some government grants. We've got grants with DARPA, with the Department of Energy, with NASA. That's really kind of exciting technology. technologies that we're doing. We have a lot of technologies that we just license to other companies. But what's most exciting is we have a material science company that has spun out. And within that, we have a wood composite technology and an asphalt technology. We started a pharmaceutical company where we have an oncology program and a neuroscience program. And so essentially, I'm just going to give you a sense of what does green chemistry look like from a commercialization of technologies, just to close out. And so we have a lot of pharmaceuticals, ALS, Alzheimer's, oncology, diabetes. We have construction material, asphalt. You know, asphalt, something as interesting as asphalt. In the United States, there's 1 billion miles of asphalt pavement. And the sun and the air oxidize the surface of the asphalt, so it becomes brittle and hard. So what we do is we dig it up and we put it in a landfill. Maybe 5% will we use, but because it's so brittle and hard, it's not very usable. So the landfills are just becoming filled and filled and filled with not only the asphalt from the pavement, from old shingles too, the asphalt shingles. So I'm thinking about that and I'm saying, why can't we have a street Zamboni? I'm a hockey player from Boston. I can't help it. So essentially have this truck come down, dig up the old pavement, and just put new pavement behind, have some additive that magically fixes that. All right, and again, from Boston, Bobby Orr, the Boston Bruins, if anyone knows Boston hockey, that's a very big thing. All right, and so we came up with an idea, this additive, and so on November 25th, 2013, we dug up my driveway. Okay, it was a perfectly good driveway. My wife and daughter just came in, and they're sitting in the back there. And we have in the United States in November, you have what's Thanksgiving, where family comes over, and we're like, oh my God, we just dug up a perfectly good driveway. The workers come with my new additive invention. They're laughing at me. They go, John, you idiot. It's 17 degrees Fahrenheit. We have never paved at this cold of temperature. You're using over 65% recycled material. Can't be done. We're going to open up the truck. A big hockey puck's going to fall on your front lawn, and we're going to drive away. There was a guy from the Department of Transportation there with a clipboard watching this. They're like, okay, go ahead, do it. They open up the truck. It comes out like sand. They scream like school children, jump on their bulldozers. Whee! And here it is just a couple weeks ago. Beautiful. It outperforms typical asphalt. It is really, really cool. And so within a couple months, we had it, like I think this now at last count, 27 states in the United States have approved it for jobs. And we were so quick, we started the company called Collaborative Aggregates. I wanted to call it Entropy Mix, but people said, oh, that'll never work. I said, how about Delta S? They go, oh, that's good. Don't tell them. All right. So here's a strange picture. So this is me. All right, I'm wearing a hard hat, wearing boots, got a shovel, and I'm standing in a steaming pile of asphalt. My cell phone goes off, and it's clinicians talking about my Alzheimer's drug and the results of some cognition studies with laboratory animals. Now, most people would say, asphalt, neuroscience, that doesn't seem normal. But wait a minute, my model that we've been working on with the Alzheimer's is these organic proteins that wrap around an inorganic particle. The molecule slips into the interface and controls the aggregation. What is asphalt pavement? An organic polymer wrapped around an inorganic particle. Delta S is a small molecule that controls the, it's the same thing. You know, we kid ourselves, oh, I'm a medicinal chemist, I'm a pharmaceutical scientist, I'm a cosmetic scientist, I'm a whatever. A molecule doesn't know what industry it's in. So molecular mechanism, once you see the commonality, what's really interesting when you're focusing on one thing, what happens in the peripheral is the opportunity for invention. And so by positioning inventions and innovations in this three-dimensional space so that you always have something in the peripheral vision, it doesn't make it crazy to be doing stuff like this. We have a hair fabric shaping and toning thing. You know, there's this disease called psoriasis, in which one of the cures is you put your hands and your feet, or that I did when I had the disease, it was on my hands and my feet, in an ultraviolet light box. And it cures it, and it's a technology, and what it does, I got really into it, it cross-links the thymine in DNA. So thymine is one of the DNA base pairs, and it does this 2+2 dimerization reaction. It's a very bad mechanism that leads to skin cancer, but it's a good mechanism that cures some diseases, and very, very efficient. So knowing that nature has constructed this efficient model, I said, what if I put it in synthetic polymers? What if I put it in biopolymers? So next thing you know, I start making all of these polymers, synthetic polymers, and I find that if I put it in hair and take one of those little carnival glow sticks and click it, it holds the curl. We end up, next thing you know, we're controlling pleats and textiles, using this biomimicry approach to looking at how thymine responds to light. We were able to make consumer products that hold shape within fabrics and textiles. One of the products is Brazilian Blowout. It's people who straighten their hair. They use this product that's called the Brazilian. It's actually formaldehyde. You literally embalm your hair. Now, if we could curl hair with this other technology, and say, what else do people use formaldehyde for? Oh, wood. In the United States and North America, the #1 construction material is what's called oriented strand board, OSB lumber. It's a wood composite adhesive of wood chips, and most construction is built on this thing. And in the news in the United States, there's a lot about formaldehyde off-gassing and isocyanate off-gassing. And so we did a 70-ton pilot scale run at a pilot plant with this novel technology. It outperforms in materials performance, on parity with cost, without a drop of formaldehyde, without a drop of isocyanates. It's another technology that Collaborative Aggregates is commercializing. All right, here's a strange story. One day, I'm thinking about bugs and how when a bug sheds its exoskeleton, what it does is it can't grow, and so it breaks off, and over the course of a couple hours, it turns hard and black again. Something in nature that goes from white to black. People color their hair. So in the United States, there's a product that is sold over the market to color men's hair. The key ingredient is lead tetraacetate. You can't buy a house in the United States with lead paint, but you can pour it on your head, all right? And so I looked at the process, and it's a tyrosinase cascade that does an oxidative process and so I found, I didn't grind up dead bugs. I found some plant extracts and food-grade materials, ground it up, bought a bunch of gray hair, put it in, and it worked. But there was dark brown, there was black, it's like all different colors. I said, oh man, there's all these different colors. So I called the vendor, and the vendor said, oh John, that's not one person's hair. That was a bunch of people's hair. Ooh. So I'm the grayest person in the company, so I jump in a chair and go, hit me. And my hair goes back to exactly the color it was 30 years ago. Someone that had black hair that had gone gray, it goes black. Someone who had brown hair that's gone gray, it's gone brown. It restores the original color. It's not a hair colorant. It actually restores the human pigment. It goes back and recreates the human pigment. It doesn't wash out, it doesn't fade, and it looks real because each strand has its own nuances. Just like your finger has a fingerprint, your hair has a hairprint. Ooh. So we licensed it to a company that started, and it called themselves Hairprint, and it's been online on sale at myhairprint.com for the last 2.5 years. And if you act now for $39.99, they'll throw in a knife. Okay, yeah, but it's non-toxic, environmentally benign. Ocean plastics is a big issue. I found myself in 2015 on the center stage of the United Nations General Assembly. My big head projected up there. It's what happened was 2 weeks earlier, this show on TV, Whale Wars, calls me up. And apparently this show, my daughters watched it. I didn't really know what it was, but I guess they go into international waters and find illegal fisher people doing illegal things. And they came up with 75 tons of an illegal fishing net. And this net is a gill net or something, and so they send a bunch of it to us, and we had to separate the nylon from the polypropylene. We had to separate the heavy metals. We had to extrude it to a precise dimension. We didn't have the right extruder, so we went online and we found blueprints for them. We built it, and we spooled out, and we made all the stuff, and we ended up sending it to Adidas. And standing beside me was someone from the board of directors of Adidas holding up their 2016 running shoe made out of ocean plastic. That was invented over a 2-week period at Warner Babcock, right immediately before that show. We have an electronic, it's interesting, oranges. In the United States, every personal product was orange scented a few years ago. Then the EPA realized that a percentage of the population is sensitized to limonene. And so all of a sudden, it wasn't in products anymore. And so the orange growers, oh, John, what are we going to do? And so I thought about it. And again, I can't explain why we do these things. So it's still a mystery that I don't want to think too much about. But I said, if I can hydrolyze the limonene to 50% set of derivatives of what are called limanols, and then I can put it in water and probe sonicate it using a probe sonication, I can make a flotation separator, and I can separate out lithium cobalt from a lithium battery. And it works to 100% recovery without using harsh reagents, without using, explosive kerosene reagents, but using water and lemon oil, we can recover 100% of lithium cobalt from batteries. And so we have pilot scale applications of that ongoing as we speak. We have a water harvesting technology. There's a polymer that we have invented that when it's in one state, it's hydrophobic. In another state, it's hydrophilic. And so this is a silly oversimplification, but imagine a rowboat on the ocean. And when the sun comes out, the polymer on the underside of the umbrella absorbs water. Okay? And then when the sun goes down, it becomes hydrophobic and it rains pure water in the road. So you can imagine the way that you can do these passive desalinations, or in agriculture, passive purifications of water. We have it really slow happening over 8, 9, 10-hour cycles. We have it super fast working in the shadow of a windmill, this capture and release mechanism for water purification. We have a BPA can-free can lining for cans. It's really kind of a cool experiment, that if you take a can of Coke or beer or something like that, bless you, and you take a little bit of sodium hydroxide in water and you dip the can in it, you'll find every can is actually a plastic bag. And that you can see there's a whole plastic bag and within every can. So when you hear about BPA and can lining, every can that has material in it is actually a plastic bottle with metal wrapped around it. It's a different way of saying it, but it's actually coating the metal. And it's polycarbonate that has the BPA in it. And so we've invented a technology that's BPA free. Of course, what started all this was cash register receipts, so we've got that. But the point here is, I would argue we at the Institute are no smarter, no more creative, no more innovative than anybody else. But the stake people say, we're really busy people and we are busy, time is money. We don't have time for this thing called green chemistry. All right, what I just described to you, 25 people did over 4 years. I don't feel we're going so slow. Okay, these aren't publications in journals, these are commercialized technologies. We're not successful in spite of green chemistry, we're successful because of it. That's the magic here. So we live in constraints. Science is filled with constraints. And so if you took a group of scientists and you said, okay, we're going to come up with some arbitrary constraint. You can no longer use a molecule that begins with the letter D. Well, they're going to get mad at you, but they're going to say, okay, well, we can't use the letter D. Well, anything that makes you different, if all the scientists are reading the same journals, reading the same textbooks, going to the same classes, going to the same conferences, anything that makes you different gives you a competitive advantage. Now, not using the letter D in a molecule is kind of silly, but what about using the principles of green chemistry? What about starting your design by trying to anticipate impact on human health and the environment? What you find is, instead of slowing it down, innovatively, you become faster. But then when it's time to commercialize, you navigate the regulatory process because you already thought of most of the things that are going to slow you down from that perspective. So it just kind of makes sense. So the issue is, if this makes so much sense, if society wants us to do this, if industry wants to do this, if the universities want to do this, the next generation wants to do it, what's happening? Well, we got to get the curriculum changed. We've got to get this to be part of what it means to be a chemist. So co-located at the Warner Babcock Institute is the nonprofit organization called Beyond Benign. Okay, and Dr. Amy Cannon, who's in the audience in the back here, is the executive director of Beyond Benign, and this organization is focused on K through 12 and university education, finding ways to get it into the curriculum. And so the website beyondbenign.org has hundreds of lesson plans for free, not even in PDF format, they're in Word format, and educators are invited to change it and make it their own. And so it's cross-referenced with different standards, so we're not saying saying you should teach this. So when someone has to teach a certain subject, we have information on how to integrate concepts of sustainability. And what we find is that student performance in STEM education goes through the roof when you give it a meaning. If you're calculating the area of a triangle, and then say, well, what is the difference between the area of this triangle and this triangle? Well, as fascinating as that sounds, some students see, okay, why am I doing this? But if you associate it with deforestation or some kind of an environmental issue, they now see meaning for it. And they get up on their heels, and the teachers are more excited, and the students are more excited. And so we find that this is a subversive way of teaching sustainability while simultaneously improving student achievement in STEM education. But the most important program, in my opinion, is the Green Chemistry Commitment. And that is asking universities, chemistry programs worldwide, to sign a commitment saying that while it's really hard right now because we don't have the curriculum, we're going to find a way to make sure no student ever graduates from our university that we hand a degree in chemistry to that doesn't understand these principles of green chemistry. And so far we have about 50 signers, maybe 45 signers, and we're gaining momentum, and every year, every day we get an announcement someone else is joining. And so just really excited to be here in Australia, specifically in Victoria, specifically with Monash, that is a leader in green chemistry, and be able to celebrate the advances that you guys have done and just dream about the things that you can do in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, thank you, Don. Thanks. I'm sure you'll all agree that that was quite inspiring. And one of the things that we've been talking about in the environmental protection sector is how we actually turn people on to actually see the possibility and see the innovation of what we can do in the future. And I think what John has presented today are some of the things we could do, and importantly, how critical chemistry is and chemistry education is to our disciplines and how we operate into the future. Now, we have a little bit of time for a few questions. For those of you who are live streaming, you can submit your questions via Twitter using hashtag ENVSci series. So hopefully you've already seen that in the notifications. And so does anyone have any questions you'd like to put to John? We have roving mics. Well, I'm going to ask one. Having been involved in education sector at the university level, one of the challenges in introducing some of the environmental impact or toxicology or whatever is that, and this is relevant to the chemistry discipline, is that they say they don't have room in the degrees. Mm-hmm. And then, so how do you get that room in the degrees without putting more years on? And then the other side is a declining interest in that particular area. So how, I mean, your presentation can turn them on, but how do we turn on students to actually pick up these things as well?
Well, my immediate response is the inflexibility of the curriculum and the fact that less people are interested might be related because the world does change. Yeah. Okay, but chemistry education right now is at such an excellent level. We do such a good job worldwide training chemists to meet the needs of society. But it's a tough job. You know, educators are doing research, they're teaching classes, they're writing grants. And so even if people passionately say this is a really important thing that we should do, well, so aren't 30 other things that they have to do. And so I don't believe that this pushback from the perspective of we vehemently should not do this. It's how do we put this in and how do we prioritize it, because everybody else has their thing that they want to do too. And so I completely understand that, and that's why we feel it should be, you know, the Beyond Benign and the Green Chemistry Commitment is completely non-prescriptive, that every university has a set of faculty that see the world through their eyes and have every right to shape their program and their curriculum the way they want it. So all we ask is, within the confines of how they see their world should be, find a way to get this in. Whether it's a standalone class at one university, or at another university it's just a seminar series that's required by the students, or at another university it's integrated into the freshman laboratory, the organic laboratories. The idea is that if universities start doing this, and with this part of this commitment, share these ideas and best practices, it becomes easier and easier for the next university to do it because we're sharing the best practices. And so, to be clear, our goal is not to have every university in the world sign the green chemistry commitment. Our goal is to make it no longer necessary because everyone's already doing it. Yeah.
Fabulous.
Some questions over here.
Thank you. That was amazing talk. Really good. My question is about the cost. So when you assess the cost, are you assessing it in terms of its inherent cost or the costs associated with kinds of regulations? Because if it's in relation to the regulations and we start using less toxic chemicals, then there's no need for the regulations, and then the incentive to go to less toxic things are less because it'll become more cost effective to go to the hazardous stuff. And then if you go developing nations where the regulations aren't so tough, then if the cost includes the cost of complying with regulations, that consistency.
Okay, so regulations are an important component to motivation. And there's almost a chicken and egg thing. If there weren't regulations, would people care so much about green chemistry? And absolutely, there is a certain percent component of cost that is directly associated with regulation. But it's not just that. The thing about chemistry that's hard for people to understand is that when we learn chemistry, we talk about percent yield. If you write a chemical reaction, A plus B goes to form C plus D. And you want D, and so you're going to sell D. And if you got A plus B going to make 100% of D, as a chemist, you can publish in the highest impact factor journals because you've got this 100% yield. But if the process necessitates the formation of a byproduct, A plus B goes from C and D, and C, even if it's not toxic, if it's just waste that you've got to deal with, interestingly enough, the cost associated with that is often very high. In a typical laboratory setting, let's just say your average chemistry professor at a university, the amount of money they spend buying materials, a research lab at a company, the amount of money they spend buying materials is the budget that they see. The way we handle the economics and the finances, someone comes with a cart, takes all the waste away, and it vanishes. And the person buying the stuff doesn't see the cost of that waste, hazardous or not. And oftentimes there's a 3 to 5 times greater cost in getting rid of waste than acquiring the material in the first place. But usually that's somewhere in the overhead, and those true costs aren't really felt and seen. And in chemistry, typically, we focus on that 100% yield and don't think about that other thing. An engineer who inherits that and has to design the process, they're going to roll their eyes and go, oh my God, what are we going to do with this other material? But if the chemist is thinking about that and designing things and anticipating it, for example, there's this thing, Roger Sheldon came up with this concept called E-factor. It's an efficiency factor. And different industry sectors have different efficiencies, and it's essentially an evaluation of how much waste is generated per unit product. The petroleum industry has been so good over the years of getting this well. It's less than 0.1% waste. Everything they make, they use. But the pharmaceutical industry, on average, pharmaceutical industry makes 200 to 500 pounds of waste per 1 pound of product. Whether that's toxic or not, in the United States, it costs about $2 a pound to deal with waste. So reducing the waste generated in a manufacturing process by 10% of a sub-blockbuster pharmaceutical translates to about $150 million a year in cost savings. But once the FDA approves the process, once you've got the manufacturing stuff locked in, you're done. You can't change it. So the time to do these things is the moment the scientist puts pen to paper and starts thinking about it. That's when to anticipate these things, not after. But if that person that's designing has no clue about those realities, they're perfectly happy with their 100% yield.
Okay.
Thank you for your talk. Really enjoyed that. Ocean plastics were mentioned. I wonder if you've got any thoughts to share with us. Firstly, on the creation of more biodegradable plastics. Or alternatively, at the other end, how we actually deal with the waste.
Yes.
Often a sort of mixture of many plastics.
And that's a solution that needs many different, a problem that needs many different solutions. There's what do we do with the plastics that are out there now? How do we stop plastics from getting out there in the future? And so the way I look at it, there's two things. First, to create a different economic model so that they don't make it out there, and somehow, create biodegradable materials that when they get out there, they degrade into innocuous byproducts, or we do some kind of a process where there's a reuse and it makes it more facility. It's an unmet need. Right now, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation announced this big prize with the Prince of Wales just a few months ago. There's a huge prize for people to innovate and come up with novel new ways of solving this problem. So right now we don't have solutions, and we need every kind of solution that we can think of to do it. But the problem is that the plastics that are out there now were not designed to anticipate any way of dealing with them after use. So that's one solution we've got to focus on. But we need to invent plastics that in the future are designed to anticipate that problem so that it's more cost effective and pragmatic, and we don't continue to make that product. So it's something that has gained a ton of attention. I would argue of all environmental issues right now, ocean plastics seems to be one of the, gets a great deal of focus, at least in the United States. A lot of celebrities are getting involved in this and everything. And from a technical perspective, we don't have many solutions yet. And so we need to have them.
Sorry, I've just been handed the mic. I've got a question from Twitter. I'm going to shorten this. How does the average punter avoid being fooled by brands greenwashing their products?
Okay, greenwashing is a very serious issue. And again, that's one of the problems that has to go with education. If you ask a bunch of professional chemists, is this greenwashing? They may or may not even really know how to figure that out. But to me, I answer this question with two different types of answers. One is, if someone is lying, if someone is misrepresenting what is happening, we must deal with that very seriously and very quickly and find some ways that, and there are a lot of watchdog groups that the moment a company makes a claim, they're descended upon, and there's a lot of feedback of people saying, wait a minute, this isn't really true. So there's a lot going on. But then I caution, and I say there's a difference between misrepresenting the truth to not doing enough. If I were to give a science talk and never mention toxicity, never mention anything, a group of scientists, a group of people will, oh, great talk, wonderful, oh, that's wonderful. If during that exact same talk I mention, oh, I wanted to use this instead of this because it's less toxic, I promise you, every question at the end of my talk will be, well, isn't that toxic? Isn't that bad? Isn't that bad? If I said nothing, no one brings it up. But if I mention a little, I got to do everything. Now everyone's looking at where I'm failing. So where is the motivation of an organization if the enemy of the excellent is the perfect? We need to recognize there's a difference between solving some problem but not everything versus lying. All right, and so there are 12 principles of green chemistry. I myself personally have never worked on a technology where I've been able to address all 12. I may be able to work on 2 or 3 of them. Now, someone else may work on 2 or 3 others, and someone else may work on 1 or 2, and then someone may come, but that's how science works. But if we wait until we've got perfection, nothing will happen. So greenwashing by misrepresenting the truth, got to be dealt with. But saying it's not good enough, well, nothing will ever be good enough. Here's the sad reality. There is no such thing as green chemistry. Everything we do as humans has impact on human health and the environment. Inaction has impact on human health and the environment. So we've got to accept the fact that that is our reality and then just be dedicated to tomorrow doing better than today. Next year doing better than this year. And this is a journey that we got to, toxicologists are going to discover tomorrow something we thought was safe, and we've got to be tapped into this knowledge and continue doing it. But if we say do nothing until it's perfect, we will do nothing, and that's unacceptable.
Probably our final question. Thanks, Larry.
It's great to see the increased activity around the circular economy and a lot of the large corporates getting involved. Last week, VTT and Nokia are looking at recycling plastics, Akzo Nobel in Netherlands and a group of companies. Do you think the skills, are we developing the skills or bridging those skills to be able to keep up with all of these new companies and new models that are coming through with the circular economy, or do you see a positive trend in that respect?
There's a positive trend. So again, if you look at the diagram that I had, molecules to materials to devices and stuff like that, I feel that we as a society, product designers, people making products that are working as consumer-facing companies, care greatly about this issue, and they're trying desperately to create better products. But the problem is all they have available to them is that what is in the supply chain. And so as you try to invent a sustainable product, if your building blocks aren't sustainable, you can't weld, sew, glue, bolt, create a sustainable product if the building blocks aren't sustainable. So while I would say there's been massive growth, every design school has sustainability programs, every company has chief sustainability officers, the consumer-facing companies are getting it, but their hands are tied when an invention has to happen. Because you need the molecular sciences, you need the beakers and flasks people to be inventing solutions. We can only go so far with innovative product design. Until we have a set of materials that meet these needs, we can only do so much. So are we doing amazing with these programs that are asking product designers to do their job? Yes. But oftentimes when I go to those things, I'm the only chemist in the room. And we need to change that. We need chemists to be recognizing that the world is getting to a point where it can go no further in this game unless they start adding new pieces to the puzzle.
Okay, look, I think this has been fantastic. As I say, it's reinvigorated me. I love chemistry, although I call myself a bucket chemist, so, but it inspires me to look further, and certainly as an organisation, EPA will be focusing on the life cycle of products, and so that we can deal with some of the issues that we have to in a legacy sense. So thank you, John, for a fantastic talk and for your insights. Our next environmental science series will be on the 7th of June, and the topic is vulnerability of children to environmental exposures, which have been touched on today. And so we'll be opening that up for registration shortly. But please join me again in thanking John for coming and sharing with us today.